Welcome to the Media Roundtable Industry Edition. If you've been keeping up with us, we've spent the last few years talking to leading voices in podcast about what they create, why they create it, and the impact they want it to have on the world. This is a true roundtable format, and like we say in the name, this is our Industry Edition. So it's going to be less focused on creators generally, but today we have a special exception as we have three incredible creators joining the show. More on that in a minute. But we are really focused on media and audio industry experts and how we can each adapt to the news of the day. I'm your host, Jennifer Laine, and I'm head of brand purpose at Oxford Road. Today, I'm joined by Brett, Ben, and Jordan Meiselas, co-founders and co-hosts of Midas Touch and the Midas Touch Network. Additionally, I'm joined by Dan Granger, founder and CEO of Oxford Road. Welcome to the Media Roundtable, everyone.
Good to be here. Thanks for having us, Jennifer, Dan, and your whole team. We're so grateful to be invited.
Hey, guys. Thank you so much. Excited to be here.
Going to be a good one.
It will be a good one. And I think all best ones sort of start from the beginning. And so the Midas Touch Network, tell us, COVID 2020 start, sort of top line overview from day one. How did you get into it? What was the impetus for those of you who aren't, those of our in our audience who aren't totally familiar with your network and your shows? Let's hear sort of the kitchen table story.
Well, I'm Ben. I'm the older brother. Brett is the middle brother. Jordy's the youngest brother. We always wanted to work together on something, but life took us in very different paths. I was a civil rights lawyer. I went to Georgetown Law, represented a lot of people in high-profile cases out in California, but kind of went about my life and kind of gleefully ignorant to a lot of political developments and put my head down and just, did my job in a worksmanlike fashion and enjoyed my career as a civil litigator. Brett, the middle brother, was a top digital editor. He worked for The Ellen Show and helped run their digital department and did a lot of the kind of digital shorts and rapid response that was very successful over there. And Jordy's career took him in the field of marketing, and he worked for a boutique marketing firm that did a lot of really big campaigns that kind of was the intersection of kind of corporations and entertainment and trying to make new, innovative, and compelling campaigns, a lot of stuff for professional athletes and brands. But when we were all kind of stuck in our homes as the world was and as our country was during COVID, we were very nervous about the direction of our country. We were very nervous for our lives, the same way that, all of America was at that time. We were nervous about our families. We were nervous about our friends and our community, and we would share our feelings on text message threads. And finally, it got to the point where we were like, let's just do something about it. And I think Brett said, with Brett's digital background, so if we really commit to this, I'm in, and then I said, I'm in. And then Jordy said, I'm in. So we didn't really know what we were going to even call this thing. Was it just going to be a blog? We had no clue, but we wanted to share what we were talking about in our text message thread to the world so that we could share our thoughts. And look, our backgrounds really aren't as political people, which is interesting considering our network right now is largely considered one of the larger political networks. But as we talk throughout this roundtable, you'll see that I don't really think we see it in those terms necessarily, but we started talking about the state of our country from kind of an outsider's perspective. And it started with one person reading our article, and we then started a Twitter account, and we started, building up other social media accounts. We called ourselves Midas Touch because of our hard to pronounce last name, Meiselas, and our mother's maiden name is Golden. So we kind of fused Meiselas and Midas Touch, and that's how you get Midas Touch. And a lot of people are like, what is a Midas touch? And lots of people, when we were getting into politics, basically said, you need to call yourself like the the Democratic, da, 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 da. We're like, okay, no, we're just going to call ourselves Midas Touch. We like the name. We're going with it. And we started off with 1 follower and then 5 followers. And the message started resonating to the point where today we have over 1 million followers on Twitter. By the end of this month, we'll likely have 1 million subscribers on YouTube, get about 70 million views a month on YouTube videos. We started a whole podcast involving a whole network involving multiple podcasts and multimedia. And it just grew and grew and grew. But that's the high level summary.
Well, so you guys are, you're not alone in being a family who's texting each other about political issues and thinking that the whole world should hear it. But what's unique is that you actually pulled off getting 1 million followers in the process. It's pretty impressive. What were you going to say, Jennifer?
No, but you probably are alone in wanting the world to see that. Like, I'm not sure. I want the whole world to
I don't
see
know. Have you read the comments on social media?
Well, anyway, it was very important for us, though, when we started building this, to be accountable to our viewpoints so that people can put a face to the messages that were out there. And we wanted them to know about our backgrounds, and we wanted them to see who we were and to criticize us and to challenge us. And we're okay with that. And that was always the mentality and ethos that we had, is this has to be transparent if it's going to work.
Okay, I want to back up for a second because we're going to get into democracy, politics, the business, journalism, all that. Before we do that, I'm really nutty about birth order theory, and I want to know how that plays out for you guys, because this stuff has to come up. Do you follow the typical archetypes of an oldest, middle, and youngest in your personalities and in the dynamic with how you guys operate and what you create?
I'll let the middle brother answer.
Yeah, I'll say, I need to get a word in here. So
I was going to say the middle brother has to pipe up, and the older brother has to get there first. So
let me get a word in between these two. No, yeah, I think absolutely. I think definitely there is plenty of truth to that. I think Ben is certainly the older brother in many ways, and I'm definitely the middle one, and Jordy is definitely the younger one. Even though people look at us, they often might get that confused. But I think personality-wise, I think that is certainly the case.
Yeah, that was cool when we were younger, Brett. But I've just been continuing to age in dog years now that I'm hitting my 30s. So not great for me. But yeah, as far as the teasing goes, like I said, I'm turning 30 in a month. These guys just relentlessly, tooth and nail every day. But it's great. We bring the humor to the network, and I think people could resonate with that.
So a funny story that's totally random to this entire conversation is there was a brief period in high school where Jordy and I were at the same high school because our age difference is only 3 years. And for lunch, often I would go to the local Quiznos and I'd get a certain kind of sandwich at Quiznos, and Jordy about an hour later would go to the same Quiznos and order the same sandwich. And the guy behind the counter was always just so confused. And we realized after a while that he thought we were the same person coming back within an hour getting the same sandwich. He just thought we were like animals. And then at a certain point we had to explain to him we were two different people, and his mind was truly he was like, I just thought you just ate and I got but that kind of shows you we definitely used to look a lot more alike, but people definitely confuse us all. So
all right, so according to birth order theory, so Ben is the responsible one. He's the one that it's always going to deliver and get the job done. Jordy's a good time and is the one you want selling because he's not worried about anything. He's going to be fine. And Brett, you're just kind of pissed because just because Ben can do it doesn't mean you can't do it too. And you've got to be the kind of yin to his yang. Is that kind of how it all works out in real life?
Yeah, well, I'm certainly, the high performer here who, is outworking the other two. But what are you going to do?
All right, so Ben's the crumbler.
I would say, truthfully, Brett is probably the most responsible one here of all of us. I'll give that to Brett.
Yeah, I have to give that to Brett too.
Well, he's also the tech guy, as it turns out.
It's a low bar.
But I'll say this about Brett. I'll say this about Brett, though, as the tech guy or tech person, which is he truthfully, I wasn't trying to turn this into let's celebrate Brett podcast, but Brett's digital editing skills as a technical editor and his tech skills in general, if there were to be the equivalent of a US Open tennis, yes, I bet you Brett would probably have numerous titles because he truly is at a technical level a savant. He'll be posting things on Twitter, be on YouTube during a podcast, all at the same time. And I'll be like, how did you do that? I haven't even finished speaking a sentence yet.
Well, so is that
didn't know the direction this podcast was going to go in, but I'm really happy with the way it's going. So let's keep
We're going to go in a very different direction very shortly here, and I'm going to give it back to Jennifer. But I do want to understand, like, how do you get to 1 million people, between COVID starting and end of COVID, if we can call it that? Like, that's a lot of traction very fast. So was it that, was it marketing? Was it a technical expertise? Obviously, you have a message that's resonating. It starts with the product, but there's also has to be a business around it. There also has to be some maneuvers. So, like, how did you do it? How did you scale it?
I think everything, to your point, has to be very technically well done. Like, if we put out crap product, if the videos were horrible, if we weren't good podcast hosts, and we would not have succeeded, right? But so you have to still perform, you have to prepare. We work really hard, but that also doesn't necessarily correlate to a good performance. I could work really hard on basketball skills, but put me on a court with LeBron James, I could be working 20 hours a day on my basketball form. I'm going to get destroyed. But we do put in the work. We do then perform. But ultimately, I think that there was a real kind of niche or an opening that existed based on the failed state of large media in general. The entire format, I think, is a dysfunctional format. The idea of 24-hour news with two people on screens yelling at each other back and forth and screaming at each other, people who are not even necessarily experts and well researched on the topic, who just need to fill airtime, gives viewers the impression that to every issue, there's both sides, there's conflict, there's outrage, and people are left very confused. And so if you may like our ideas or not like our ideas, but we're going to present it to you in a format that you've never heard before, that's well thought out and well researched, and we frame issues differently. We don't buy into the labels and the titles, and there was a real room for that organically, and that's where a lane that I think we've filled.
Okay, so there is so much in there that we want to unpack. Like, how do you define experts, news formats being broken, et cetera? And we'll get to all of that. But I think where I'd be interested to start first is how you found your niche. Adding to that, you've built a huge audience. So 1 million people, like, how do you choose? Question number 2, guess. But question number 1, like, how do you choose who to give a platform to? Like, you have 6 shows now. How did you find that those shows needed to be put out there? How did you find the voices that you wanted to put in the position to have those platforms? Like, walk us through how you choose voices to platform, content to platform.
Well, I think part of it is understanding your own limitations. I think that's an important thing, and saying, we're really good at this set of things, but we aren't necessarily experts in this field. So if we want to do a show about the conflict between Russia and Ukraine, let's get the preeminent experts on that subject to do a podcast on that subject. If we want to do a podcast on cults and culty programming, let's get the preeminent expert in that field who's been through it, who's been studying it for the last 40, 50 years to do a podcast on it. And so I think part of the magic of it is simple. It's finding legitimate figures who have experience, in a lot of cases, decades and decades of experience, who are good behind a camera, who are good on audio, who could deliver a message clearly and coherently to an audience. And I think if you have that with sort of our stamp of approval on it, I think you have a really good combination and a way to reach people in a way that is different than the way other people are reaching people. And like Ben said, you have on TV and in a lot of sort of radio hits, it's all these quick kind of sound bites and interviews. And we want people who could really dive into a subject, who aren't just concerned about a sound bite here or there, but are concerned about really delving into an issue in an interesting way and presenting it in an interesting way. And I think one of the benefits, too, of the way we frame things is the fact that we didn't come from the political world before, so we're not looking through things in that lens. And so as far as the growth of the network and the growth of all of our content, what we see see is our stuff was resonating in a way. And the comments that we would see early on were, oh my, I never heard anybody put it that simply before. I never heard anybody put that twist on it. I never heard anybody, say it that way before. And we were like, why not? Like, to us, everything was just so obvious the whole time, and we couldn't believe it. So, I think that's an important, way of doing it, and just trying to, see, a lot of people are like, well, what are you doing? Are you posting things that are trending topics, and you're jumping on the trends? And we're always like, no, like we don't deal with that. Like we aim to set the trends. We aim to set the narrative. And what we've found success in with our podcasts, with our videos, with all the things we do online is oftentimes our stories and the things we're focusing on, we often see the next day or the next week be filtered onto the mainstream media sources. And then all of a sudden they're talking about the same issues, or they bring on the same guest who came onto our podcast and ask them the same questions so they could get the same soundbite we've seen that happen like a dozen times on CNN and MSNBC, like the day or two after we got a guest who wasn't like a big guest who always appeared on these stations. So I think it's interesting, and I think that's part of the magic behind it.
And I think part of, Brett, to build on that too, I think a lot of our secret sauce is the community that we've really been able to foster. So, our network, we're the Midas Touch Network. There are people now, if you go on Twitter or Instagram or whatever, and you look up Midas, they call themselves Midas Stacy or Midas Steve or Midas Brian, because they really do resonate with the message, and they refer to themselves as the Midas Mighty. So it's truly a community just built on, people who aren't being talked down to, but are just like, hey, let's go have a conversation. They feel really a part of the ride with all of this. And it's been so amazing to be able to work with the community as we continue to grow.
Yeah, look, having listened to a lot of your shows, I think that really comes through. And I was raised in sort of a direct speaking home, family of 4 siblings as well. So I really appreciate that you guys don't necessarily dance around topics, but you don't try to overcomplicate it either. And so for the one sort of question below that, just to be super clear for the brand marketers who are in our audience, you guys have 6 shows. Who wants to take care of just like a very top line description, what the show's about, who the audience is, etc.?
I'll leave it to the middle brother there.
Okay. Well, we have the flagship podcast, which is our Midas Touch podcast, which is the podcast featuring the 3 brothers, where we get to rag on Jordy a bit and rag on each other, but Jordy gets the brunt of the jokes, I would say. But we get to speak about issues, and we get to speak about it through a lens of honesty, truth, family, community. We try to keep things as light as possible, even if we're speaking about heavy issues. And it's all through the lens of our perspective as 3 brothers kind of navigating this chaotic world. And so I think that is what makes it kind of different than any other podcast out there. And that's why we lean into, our individual personalities and our personalities as brothers, because if you don't, then it's just, 3 guys talking politics or whatever. And that's no fun. So I think it's important that you have your own perspective and your own lens in which you see the world through. And we try to sort of invite everybody into our family on the Midas Touch podcast. And that's always very important to us. We have our flagship
Good description right there.
Thank you, Ben. We could write that down for the podcast description. Switch it up. We have the Legal AF podcast, which is our flagship legal podcast. It features Ben over here, older brother Ben, civil rights attorney, and we got Michael Popak. What was Michael Popak's official legal title? I don't want to butcher it.
No, he's a lawyer. He's a partner at a really large law firm, and used to be one of the top lawyers at a major financial institution. Was there. Number 2 lawyer there. And
then our additional co-host is Karen Friedman Agnifilo, who is one of the top was one of the top prosecutors at the Manhattan DA's office, one of the best in the business. And it's so great to have, her experience and her expertise on the show.
You didn't have a sister?
We have a half sister. We have a younger half sister.
Is she on one of these or what? Where's she at?
She's 18 and just started college at USC.
Soon enough.
She's taking radio classes.
That's a TikTok age. We'll get to podcasts.
We'll hit that next. Don't worry. Okay. We'll get there. We'll get there. But the Legal AF is the flagship legal show where it's more kind of straightforward legal analysis of the most hot button legal topics of the week. That airs twice a week. We have a show called Majority 54, which is a new show on our network featuring Jason Kander, who is the former Democratic Missouri Secretary of State and presidential candidate. Just a really dynamic figure who at one point everybody thought was going to be the next president, and had like Obama's like seal of approval and everything, which was pretty cool. And this guy Ravi Gupta, who founded an organization called Arena, and Ravi also was a former Obama campaign staffer. So they do this podcast
and Yale Law School. He's like the smartest person ever.
He's like absolutely brilliant. And their podcast is, they're both have a lot of family members who think politically very different than them. I mean, Jason Kander is from Missouri. And so a lot of their podcast is, how do you talk to people with opposing ideas? How do you speak to people and connect with people and kind of court them over to, understand like where we're coming from with our perspectives. So they have a really interesting show.
Also, Kander's a military vet. He's written a book about PTSD as well. Served overseas in combat zones, and gives that perspective as well.
Yeah. So then we have a new show also, The Political Beatdown with Ben and over here and Michael Cohen, which is an insider's look into the various criminal investigations that are going on right now. And you have, Michael Cohen, Donald Trump's former attorney there, who is giving his personal insight. And it's a really unique podcast that a lot of people that's catching fire right now, because, there's no one who knows better about the inner workings of these things than the guy who is literally going every single week to the Manhattan DA and then comes on this show to reveal everything he can. So it's a really unique insight that people aren't getting anywhere.
He breaks all of the news first on Political Beatdown before he does any of the
Then he does the MSNBC hit, then he does everything. So it's cool. We'll always have the exclusive on that show. We have a show called The Influence Continuum, which is a show about cult deprogramming and sort of the brainwashing that happens across the country. The guy who hosts it is a Dr. Stephen Hassan, and Dr. Hassan has a really interesting story. He's written a bunch of books, and he, in his 20s, actually was in a cult called the Moonies, which you may have heard of, and got out of the cult, and he himself was deprogrammed. And then once he got out of that, he dedicated his life to studying cults and to helping other people get out of those sorts of situations. So he has like 40, 50 years of experience in doing that. And he has his show. We have a true crime series called American Psyop, which we did 9 episodes of, which was hugely successful. American Psyop, it has similar themes to that, but it's a true crime story about Wesley Clark Jr., who is the son of former presidential candidate Wesley Clark and NATO general, ran for president back in the day. And it was about kind of the forces out there in the world who were trying to recruit Wesley Clark's son, Wes Clark Jr., and he tells the story into these kind of dark worlds and get him to kind of do bad things, kind of brainwashed him. And so you see all these figures who are highly relevant today, but 10, 20 years ago, and how this guy was kind of manipulated as the son of a high profile figure. And it's a really, really fascinating story. And anything else?
Burn the Boats?
Well, Burn the Boats, featuring Ken Harbaugh. Ken Harbaugh is a big guy in Ohio politics, a Navy veteran, who speaks from his perspective as a Navy veteran and as someone in the Midwest who could speak on issues important to folks in the Midwest.
Former fighter pilot, and one of the interesting things about our shows is that they all have a simulcast format where they both stream on YouTube as well as have the audio element. I
can't forget about the weekend show. Sorry, the weekend show is one of our biggest shows. The weekend show is every Sunday. The weekend show is with Anthony Davis, who was a British broadcaster who used to work for the BBC. He's got like the golden voice. I wish I sounded half as cool as Anthony sounds behind the microphone.
If you remember the commercial that Nike did around the COVID time where they had a narrator, all of the stadiums were empty, and it was an iconic ad. Anthony was the narrator of that Nike ad, which is pretty cool.
All right, Anthony, sorry, I want to clarify. Ben was talking about how you simulcast, which is becoming increasingly standard protocol for podcasters. YouTube is now arguably the largest podcast platform. Where do you see more impressions coming from when you simulcast?
For us, because people want to see us, YouTube. They actually, in the comments on YouTube, we're talking about thousands and thousands of comments. What I also like about the YouTube impressions, though, from a transparency standpoint and from an advertising perspective, when I speak to an advertiser, I say, okay, you want to see the brand engagement? Go tune on live and watch us in action, because there's nothing of a better presentation than when you see tens of thousands of people all concurrently watching, and more people are streaming the Meiselas network than the combined totals of ABC, Sky News, BBC, Fox, all at once. When we're streaming, more people are watching there. So you can see those numbers and have a very easy conversation with the with potential sponsors and business partners and say, hey, look at it. But then there are people who like to listen to the audio as well. And we want to make sure that we're there with audio. But increasingly what we see ourselves being is, in the truest sense, like a competitor to large media networks doing the way we do it. And already on digital, if you just do a comparison, and again, any advertiser can look at the facts. If you want to compare us to like things like ABC and Wall Street Journal or whatever, like our numbers are like 50x them, like not even close. But if you start looking at the digital of like a Fox News or an MSNBC or a CNN, there are some days where our network beats them. There are some days where they beat us, but we are very close in the digital sphere. And I think as you see the transition, to your point, Dan, as more people are moving to YouTube, and we're getting thousands of new subscribers every day, where we're positioning ourselves is for the future, which to me, that's the direction that things are headed in.
Well, my perspective as a marketer is it's always going to be a both and, because the reality is as handsome as you guys are, not everybody's able to watch, and a lot of this type of content. The beauty of audio is you can do it while you're driving. You can do it while you're doing other things. Hopefully you don't want all your audience consuming via YouTube if they're driving. But I also know the benefit of being able to show a product, having the see-say effect. Also, attribution is always very challenging for marketers. And when you have to tell them from an audio feed, hey, after you're done listening to this, go to this website, then go to the vanity URL, and you might get something for doing that. There's a big drop off versus when you're on YouTube, you can actually embed links in the show description. Mm-hmm. People are right there. They just click. And so it doesn't require as much faith on the part of the advertiser that the impressions are hitting as hard. But there's also an argument to be made that the combination of the visual and the audio actually can be a more impactful impression. But this is something that is, I think, constantly on the minds of brands and marketers.
And so Dan, to your point, we do both. I mean, and we lean into both for that exact reason. Yeah.
So I want to understand a few other things. You guys are also you're not just a PAC, you're a super PAC. And for those of us that don't work in politics or specifically in political media, can you explain what that means and if there's implications on being a media entity that is also a PAC?
Yeah. So when we do ad buys, or when we're specifically attacking a candidate in a commercial or a billboard, or go through that, we have that handled, and that gets routed through the Political Action Committee, which makes it clear this is a political message. We've bought time on CNN or a network, or we bought time on a billboard, and we have our, paid for by the Meiselas PAC. There are a lot of entities that actually have political action committees as well that does the lobbying and actual endorsement of candidates. And so the area that when we started out doing the Meiselas initially, and we started thinking to ourselves, well, how do you even do what it is that we want to do if we want to get messages out? If we want to do one billboard, which was our goal originally, just get one billboard out there or just get one message out.
I'm guessing you got the billboard by now.
And so we Googled it, and it said, okay, you need, in order to do a billboard, you need to be a PAC, basically. And that's what took us down that path. But increasingly what we've seen, though, is that why would you buy ads on other people's networks and be, or even billboards, and be supportive of the system that you're also trying to improve and correct on the other side of it, of what you do? So increasingly, our overall plan as we head into 2023 to 2024 is to phase out the political action side of what we do and focus full time on just the media arm of things. But really, it's when you're buying ads, when you are buying billboards, when you are out there overtly contributing money in advancement of a specific campaign to make the disclosure compliant with FEC law, is why you would go about that. But I think over time, you're going to see here the political action arm fade, because why contribute to a flawed system when our whole ethos is rebuilding the system from the ground up?
And I'll also just add that I view them as, they are two entirely separate entities at the end of the day. So we have the political action committee, we have the media company. Those are two separate things. The same way that MSNBC and NBC Comcast has their own political action committee that lobbies on behalf of things that Comcast wants. Fox News also has its own political action committee that lobbies on what it wants. That doesn't mean the Fox News channel is part of a political action committee, although you could argue that it should be. But the fact is that a lot of these big organizations also have political action committees, but it doesn't mean that they're one and the same. And so our structure there is similar in that we have a political action committee. That's for, federal compliance for the advertisements from us that Ben is talking about, if we're advocating on behalf or against a particular candidate or issue or whatnot. But as far as the podcast network is concerned, the podcast, the video content and all of that, that's the Midas Touch Media Network, which is an entirely separate entity.
All right, so tell me if you've ever heard of any of these companies. Indeed, Shopify, NetSuite, Headspace, Quip, Theragun, Postmates. I'm not only the host of the Media Roundtable, but also CEO of a company called Oxford Road, and we are the world's leading independently owned and operated audio ad agency. And what that means is that we help great companies, many that you have probably heard of on some of the other podcasts that you listen to. We help them test and scale campaigns in audio channels, with podcast being one of those leading channels. Some of the work that we do includes media planning and buying, as well as analytics, attribution, and insights. And we also have a very special way that we deal with creative and copy generation. We have our own proprietary process called Audiolytics that allows us to score ads for their persuasiveness. If you're looking to be involved in audio and you want a partner that can help work with you to make sure that you achieve unprecedented ROI and massive scale, you should get in touch with us at Oxford Road. And by the way, the only reason that we're able to do the work of the Media Roundtable is because we have a great team at Oxford Road that supports us and makes it possible. So, what we're doing is not just a podcast, but we're really trying to help brands live out their values and balance that with their business objectives, which is an increasingly hard thing to do in this world of misinformation and malice that's infecting so much of our media. But at Oxford Road, we don't want to just broker this stuff. We want to impact the industry for good. We want to raise the bar on what gets created. And Oxford Road is helping make that possible through the Media Roundtable. So if you're somebody that's interested in working with an ad agency or a partner on this type of work for your advertising campaigns, go to oxfordroad.com. It's easy to spell. And get in touch with us, or at least just sign up for our free newsletter, The Influencer. That's oxfordroad.com. So just to clarify back to you guys, make sure I'm tracking, and then maybe audiences too. So when I go to your website and I donate, I'm actually giving to the PAC, which at least currently is set up to buy ads. But if you're going to create content and sell ads and create revenue from that, different rules, different corporate entity, and that's a privately held company that isn't subject to whatever laws and regulations a PAC would be. Am I getting that right?
Yep.
Okay. What's the difference between a PAC and a super PAC? And then I'm going to drop this line.
No,
of questioning.
it's the mostly all, and it gets very in the weeds on FEC law.
Yeah.
That the super PAC has unlimited expenditures that it can make, but then it also has certain limitations that it is bound to as well. Whereas the PAC itself has certain things that a super PAC can't do, but the limits of what you could ultimately spend are less, and what you can do in terms of coordinating with candidates is different than what you can do at a super PAC, which you can't coordinate at all with a specific candidate and directly work with a candidate's campaign. Although as you get into the rules, which because of the Citizens United case is a freaking mess to begin with, you could do things like hold a fundraiser for the candidate, but then just not say I'm endorsing the candidate, but bring money in for the candidate in an endorsement. So when you go through those rules, it's kind of like, who even created that system, which frankly, when we wanted to have a voice originally and just wanted to do it in a compliant way with billboards and buying an ad on TV, that's the way you do it. But the more you kind of dig deeper just into the whole kind of super PAC and PAC apparatus, it is ultimately contributing to a already flawed political system that on the media side we're criticizing, which is why eventually we're kind of phasing that out in a way that I think will be more pronounced as we head into kind of 2024. But obviously you want to do it diligently. But then to your point, Dan, when you go to the websites, when you go to the super PAC, for example, or you go to the media side, there's always disclaimers about, hey, if you're donating here, it's going there versus it's going here, just so people know and are aware of those distinctions.
Okay. And so all of that, you guys say, like all of your political initiatives together and separately, you're still pro-democracy at the end of the day, and you have it all over your website. I guess, like, what does that mean to you, and how are you using your shows to educate your audience? What do you want them to get out of it? What type of are you motivating them to action? For those who don't listen, like, what is your real goal, and how are you communicating pro-democracy?
I think the labels of progressive, liberal, conservative already create divisions versus bringing people together in ways that if I identify as this team, that inherently means I'm against that team. And so at first we said, look, if you look at our views and values, on many issues, we'd probably view ourselves as progressive minded. But then on some other issues too, when you're talking about economic issues, for example, I would go, well, is that a progressive view? Is that a liberal view? Is that a conservative view? And then there are views that people who are traditionally conservative take on certain issues, or that would be viewed as conservative. And I go, how is that a conservative view or value if you believe going into elections before they start? If you say I'll only accept the results if I win, I don't believe that is a conservative view. So when someone like that is called a conservative, I think it does a great disservice to people who were really conservative, who say, no, I believe in free and fair elections, and we have to accept the winners and losers of elections. And similarly, when you see an event to me like the January 6th insurrection, I think that Americans should rally around the fact that that's not a good thing. That's at a very basic level, that's a bad look for our country with what's happening. And we shouldn't try to justify the people who were engaged in that as being political prisoners. No, those people committed crimes and should be held accountable. So people who call insurrectionists political prisoners, I don't believe should be called conservative. So what the pro-democracy label is trying to ultimately capture is, here are a set of values that I hope people who once identified as conservative and Republican, people who are not affiliated with political parties at all, who don't care about politics, liberals, progressives, we could all rally around things, and whether, it's Mitt Romney basically saying, hey, I think we do need to support our traditional allies abroad, and you have, someone on, traditionally identified as liberal saying the same thing. How do we rally together around these views and values? And to me, ultimately, that's what pro-democracy means. And it is certainly we should be critical of our institutions. We shouldn't just accept everything that's being told to us and just be, fan people of who, of the government administration or this or that. We should view it critically, but we should recognize that our democracy is a very fragile thing, that our democracy was under attack on January 6th, that people like Vladimir Putin are not our friends, that there are things that we have to do when it comes to things like raising the debt ceiling, where we may not like raising the debt ceiling, but if we want to come up with systemic ways of addressing it, holding the nation hostage and causing America to default on its debt is horrific for everybody. We will have massive recessions and massive problems if we default on the debt ceiling, as just an example. So how do we rally around some of these, principles? And also, I don't want to be gaslit into thinking that some of the toxicity that's out there right now is normal. There was once a time where a former vice president who spelled potato wrong would have their reputation ruined, or a candidate who went windsurfing who looked completely out of touch with people would be, their campaign would be over. So I don't want candidates who are out there saying things like, grab people, women by their, like that's not, to me, acceptable discourse and in America. And we should hold our politicians to higher standards. And so the messages that we try to convey involving compassion, decency, democracy, we frame under pro-democracy at this point.
Well, and so where are the limits on where you apply that decency and that charitable approach? Are there groups of people that you believe are not deserving of that, or have not acted in good faith with some of the issues that you've raised, where you feel that they no longer are deserving of that decent treatment?
Yeah, I'll give you an example. So Marjorie Taylor Greene, who's not a fringe figure anymore, maybe once was, but is no longer just a fringe figure in the Republican Party. I would argue that she's maybe the second or third most powerful Republican in the House of Representatives right now, based on her proximity to Kevin McCarthy. And so there's video of her, for example, following survivors of school shootings and yelling at them and calling them crisis actors. So to me, that's disqualifying to me, among a number of other conduct that's engaged in there. But that's the type of conduct that, if there was a Marjorie Taylor Greene in another political party, I would hope, or the Democratic Party, I would hope that the leaders hold that Marjorie Taylor Greene accountable and expel her. But at least the current dynamics that exist right now, I don't think that a Marjorie Taylor Greene type person or a QAnon type person, it seems like it's more and more embraced in one party than another party right now. But as I've always said, I said, if I support Biden, which I do, but if I support Biden and he tweets out one QAnon meme, just one, he could do everything I like. I'm done. You're done. You're over to me. And so honestly, because it speaks to a broader serious situation that's going on that you would tweet out a QAnon meme. So to me, even though large media networks dance around the issue or go, we don't want to even talk about that takes place on the other side, I say tweeting out QAnon memes is not conservative. That's not how I want our leaders to talk.
So what is your objective? What do you want to see achieved in real life with the movement toward pro-democracy? Because, who can argue with, hopefully people aren't arguing with being pro-democracy, but we hear it on both sides, right? So for you, how does that express itself in like concrete actions?
That people and the overall discourse of the country will go back to or advance to a point where we can have discussions and debates over universal truths about the degrees in which to implement policies, but we shouldn't disagree on the very essence that the sky is blue. So the ultimate action is that I want to say is, look, I think that in the United States of America, we need to support our allies. Now, how do we go about it? I'm down to have a perfect debate and basically say, are we providing this amount of funding to Ukraine or this amount of funding? Is this too much? Is that too much? That's not really what the debates are, though. The debates kind of devolve into these memes about Zelensky that are being propagated by Putin that seems to be taking a very completely anti-Ukrainian propagandist kind of view. And to me, on a foreign policy perspective, that's a problematic thing. Now, we can agree on how much America should fund NATO and what should our obligations be, but I don't think that we should argue that we want people who have romantic relationships with Kim Jong-un or joke about that and brag about that. Like if we're talking about foreign policy here in the United States, when we're talking about domestic policy, I want to make sure that we are talking about issues like jobs for people and bringing manufacturing jobs here. And we could talk about the degree of how we should implement infrastructure or what manufacturing jobs that we should bring. But we should all agree that trying to spur the economy through jobs is a great thing. And frankly, I think with the media noise out there, you're not getting those discussions because if you only have 4 minutes per segment and you have a quick commercial hit, you can't possibly get the data to make an informed decision. So by the time you listen to our podcast or watch one of our video hits that we do, you may disagree with me 100% on what I'm saying, but I've at least spent the time in those 12 minutes to give you the research, to give you why I feel that way, and me not just starting off by saying, look at these idiots. And by the way, sometimes I make a mistake and I can't help myself. And the audience will usually check me and they'll say, whoa, we don't like that, Ben. Give us the calm, sober Ben who goes through the data and gives us the information. Let us make our minds. That's the discourse that I want to bring back here in this country.
Well, and I want to challenge you guys on this particular point, just because, look, I started going through some of your stuff. I'm trying to catch up quick. I don't get to consume nearly as much of this type of content as I'd like to. But in going through some things like recent videos on your YouTube feed referred to MAGA morons. You've got MAGA tears in my cup. I watched a video and somebody said, these assholes on the right. Now, if we're talking about a public figure like Donald Trump or Marjorie Taylor Greene, I think we know there's a different legal standard. There's a different cultural expectation. But when you're talking about millions of people that are persuaded by these folks, I question whether or not the approach of throwing so many elbows and speaking negatively about groups of individuals truly helps your end goal. Is it truly a winning strategy? Is that really helping democracy? Or is it possible that you may be caught up in the same food fight as the folks that you're complaining about on the other side?
I think it's a really fair point. And I think that there may be some videos out there that I can agree with you and go, you know what, maybe the messaging here was a little bit over the top, and does that ultimately, help the cause or hurt the cause? And any specific video where sometimes emotion will take over, and I don't know the specific videos that you're referencing, it may actually be a video where, and I'll give you an example where, you have a post the other day where, a Donald Trump, well, here's an example, where Marjorie Taylor Greene's calling for civil war, and calling for a national divorce after you take an oath of office to protect and preserve the Constitution. Now, if Kevin McCarthy stood up to that and said, you know what, we're not okay with that rhetoric here, that you're calling for secession. Sometimes in the moment, a commentator may just be so outraged in the deafening silence in the face of somebody calling for civil war that they say, you know what, these MAGA morons need to stop. But however, Dan, I do agree with your point, though. If we're ultimately trying to persuade at the end of the day, as just a, or bring people together, that may not be the best approach. And one of the most effective videos that we've done is the video involving the Fox messages that were released, where I spent 45 minutes.
Yeah.
It's got about 300,000 views, just reading the messages.
Yep.
And almost doing nothing else. And in the messages, you see the Fox hosts basically saying, our viewers are effing lunatics. We know that they're crazy, but we need to feed election disinformation to them because that's what's important for our ratings. And there, I said nothing about these effing lunatic Fox, these morons. I didn't do any of that. I just read it. And people said, you know what? This was most persuasive to all of the people I know watching it, because if you called them names at the beginning, they would have stopped watching it after 5 minutes. But my mom, who supports Donald Trump, watched this full video. So it is a great point. And actually, if you watched our podcast last night, one of the comments that I made at the outset was responsive to your point there, where I said, you know what, I've been hearing a lot of feedback about the videos lately, and you like a calmer approach to my delivery. And I said to everyone, that's what I'm going to do. But look, one of our success, and I'll stop and I'll shut up as the older brother. One of the things that I think is part of the success of what we do is that we're vulnerable, and that we're human, and that we make mistakes, and that we admit when we make mistakes, and we try to get better. We don't act like we're smarter than our viewers in any sense. And by showing that vulnerability throughout the process, we're only human, and we make mistakes too. And we're on this learning process with our viewers together, but we're trying really hard, and we care so much. And, as I like to say, a Hall of Famer sometimes bats 350.
Yeah. Well, listen, I saw you with the founder of Barstool exhibiting. I thought, Ben, your tone was exemplary in that conversation, where it did get a little contentious, but you were able to maintain decorum. And I think that it's gotten so easy for the loudest voice and the most outraged person to win attention, which in turn gets you the ability to sell more advertising to more brands for higher amounts of money. In our business, on behalf of brands, a lot of what we're doing is trying to help develop new tools and capabilities so that brands can understand, when are we talking about topics, which to me, all topics should be fair game, versus when are we talking about people, and when are we making ad hominem attacks, and when are we actually increasing the us versus them dynamic that's so pervasive in this country. And if you're selling a product, unless you have decided that your product or service is only for one niche, if you're a business, the last thing you want is to be alienating half of anybody. That's on the business side. As a citizen, my hope is that we're seeking to, you want to give a platform to ideas that are underserved. We want to give a platform and support voices that are going to be bridge builders and that are going to say, okay, how do we find people that are rational actors whom we might disagree with and have that good faith discussion without it devolving into personal attacks? And I think the more product you put into the world, and you guys have been very successful, and I'm really excited for you guys. I'm excited to do more business with you. But as you guys move closer toward giving voices to that type of discussion, this country needs leaders to model for us what a conversation looks like across differences, where we can honor and respect each other and not dismiss them out of the gate. And we all see it in our families, in our personal lives. We all have friends, we all have family that we love, but it's getting very hard to maintain relationships because we get pulled into this food fight, this culture war. And I'm concerned that the ideas being put forth by people like Marjorie Taylor Greene may sound ludicrous and terrible and treasonous, but it actually may be more likely to happen if all we do is throw a rock at her head. And sometimes I question the approach. So all that is to say, I want to encourage you, on at least behalf of my agency and some of the brands that we represent, to keep going on the rational discussion and the bridge building, where you're trying to persuade people on the other side rather than alienate them. And I know it's tough. I know it's tough to walk that line.
I think people would be surprised when you look at our audience and see the people who identify themselves as part of the Meidas Mighty. Because Ben does this great segment. He's probably done, 12 parts, called the Mass Exodus series, which is about people leaving, people who voted for Donald Trump in 2016 and later had regrets, or people who watched Meidas Touch videos and came around, people who grew up in the Republican Party of Reagan, who feel disaffected in current day. And a lot of those people have gravitated towards the Meidas Touch network, because really what we want to do when we have conversations is we could have a conversation with anybody if, like to Ben's point from earlier, if we're able to both look out the window and say the sky is blue and they say the sky is blue. Then we can get into the details of, the subjective differences. But if you're not willing to kind of concede the blatant truth that's in front of you, it's going to be like talking to a wall. And I don't think we're going to be able to persuade those people. Ultimately, I think those people need to have maybe their own journey, which could be hearing from the people who were persuaded, speaking to them. And so that's why we always encourage people to have conversations with their family members, with their friends, that our video should be a jumping off point in which people could then go and have difficult conversations with their families. But we want to basically push forward this idea of normalcy and of truth. And we could disagree on the bits about tax policy. We could disagree about how to bring healthcare to as many Americans as possible. But if you're going to tell me that, Ukraine is actually a money laundering operation, and it's a Nazi state, and you're posting pictures of Zelensky in drag, and it's a non-starter for me. At the end.
Well, and look, I hear what you're saying, Brett, but I want to challenge you too on this, because I have talked to people on both sides of the issue, had a very interesting conversation with Ben Smith, the journalist, about the notion that giving two sides to a story in journalism or in media content, that's kind of over. That's from a bygone era. And if we can't agree on basic facts, then we can't really, we have to part company. And my concern is that I know smart people that think that on both sides of the political equation. And the person who thinks you think the sky is blue and they're not acknowledging it, they think the same thing about you. So ultimately, this becomes a very emotional issue. And totally, it's not really.
Here's the one thing where I'll
let me make one last point, and then I'll give you the finish. My point is this: I would argue that when we are having something where we can't even agree on facts, that we are in an emotional state. And in an emotional state, if you attack someone, their ability to hear anything you have to say and reconsider their perspective on the color of the sky is out the window, and you've basically moved them further and further to be entrenched in the position they formerly had. That's my point of view.
Oh no, I think you're absolutely correct in that perspective. if you go after people, oftentimes, most of the time, instead of coming over to your side, they will become more entrenched in their own beliefs and they will resent you even further. And I think that's something we've certainly seen over the past few years. So I think you're 100% spot on. But, the only point that I will differ from you on is this idea that, in both sides, well, someone may see this as the truth. Someone may see this other thing as the truth. Well, like these documents released in the Fox filing show, there is a truth, though, oftentimes. It's not always super clear. But when it came to, the lies about the election, which anybody who looks at the data, anybody who objectively takes a stance on this issue, you see, yes, of course, President Biden won this election. There is no doubt about it. And then you see internally at Fox that they knew that, yet they lied to their audience about it and spread conspiracy theories about it and gaslit America about that issue. And so, yes, there are people who, believe in that truth, but that truth at the end of the day is a lie that they were fed. But it's not both of us looking out and saying the sky is blue, the sky is green. There is an ultimate answer to that topic. And I think, sorry, Ben, what are you going to say?
No. And to Dan's point, though, I think we're all in agreement there. The question is, though, when I do a video about Fox, right? If I start off the video and say, the fascist Fox propagandist network is at it again, I will lose people after the first 10 seconds of that video. But if I say, I'm Ben Meiselas from the Midas Touch podcast, I want to show you this filing by Dominion, and it's $1.6 billion defamation case. And it has deposition transcripts of Rupert Murdoch himself. It has the text messages and emails from top Fox executives. I want to spend the time and read them to you right now. And
you're letting the facts speak for themselves.
Exactly.
Which is exactly right. And all I'm saying is that versus the personal attack, I think is a far more effective way to get to the goal that we all share, I think, which is being advocates for democracy.
Absolutely.
Well, go ahead.
And I'll say, that's why, ironically or coincidentally, however you want to put it, on the political action side, one of the first ads we did that really broke through, of all things, was an ad featuring Ronald Reagan. And that was our way to reach the other side. I mean, that was the ad that broke us, so to speak, into the world. We did an ad using his debate performance against Jimmy Carter. Are you better off than you 4 years ago? And we used that as an in to pull people in, from all sides.
Love it.
And I think our general push is about, just trying to get to a place of normalcy where we could go and we could debate. We were joking around, this on the podcast, like, what would the podcast be like, 20 years ago? And it'd be a much different vibe. But we would love to be talking about the, specifics about policy and about how to accomplish things. And that's why, by the way, throughout this process, we have also consulted. And that's why we have like a podcast, for example, with that cult expert and things like that, because he also voiced the same thing that you said to us, that if you're trying to get somebody out of a specific mindset or a specific point of view, if you attack them, they're going to become further entrenched in that point of view. So you have to be very delicate and very careful about how you do it. And do we do that perfectly every time? No, absolutely not, as you said. But I think generally, if you look at the scope of the work in its totality, and the nuances of the work in its totality, and you look at those also, those videos that we were speaking about with the Exodus videos and like our show from last night and things like that, we are trying to let the facts speak for themselves. Oftentimes, you can be talking to a brick wall because people view those facts as an affront to them personally, is, certainly something that you see out there. Like you could say to somebody, very calmly, well, here's the data from, the 2020 election that shows, and you could get screamed at, you could get, that's a lie, that's fake, you're lying to me, that's not what I heard. All these people should be arrested. And you're going to get that, no matter what, but we're trying to deliver a message in the most direct way possible. We don't want to dance around it if they're, on issues that we don't think there are ambiguity to, but we want to at least have our North Star point to, let's bring us back to a place where we could have civil discussions again. Let's bring us back to a place where we all agree that we want what's best for the country. We want our kids to have a good education. We don't want anybody to struggle to pay the bills in their later years. We don't want anybody to be on the streets in this country. We care about family. We all have family values. Like, let's stop making this like, real America says this and fake America says that. Like, that's why we eschew all labels in general. And that's why, honestly, when we love when people write about us in articles and things, but when people say the progressive, the liberal group,
drives me crazy.
Yeah, we're like, I hate that. I hate that. I hate it. Because you just throw a label on us that immediately is going to turn off so many people. And that's why, we welcome everybody. If you voted for Trump in 2016, 2020, whatever, we welcome you, to join us and our point of view here. At the end of the day, though, we want to at least come at everything in good faith. And I don't think everybody comes out and everything in good faith. But if you're coming at us in good faith, we're always glad to, at minimum, have a conversation. And I think that is so lacking right now in what we're seeing across the board.
And then ultimately, Brett, I'm sorry, Jennifer, go ahead.
No, go ahead.
Oh, no, I just wanted to piggyback on Brett there and just say, it's really part of the whole ethos of Meidas Touch and the network at large, which is just leading with truth, leading with facts. And then ultimately, that message, as crazy as it might sound, that really does resonate with a large amount of folks, because ultimately people are turning on, listening to all these different podcasts, watching all these different TV shows, and they're not getting the truth. They're not simply getting the facts. And that's why when they walk away from the show, they have 18 different ideas or whatever. It's like there's a baseline set of truths and facts that you can take away from a very simple and nuanced conversation. But ultimately, people aren't getting it everywhere else. And that's why I think the Meidas Touch Network, has grown in the ways that it's grown.
Well, and speaking of it growing, I know, Brett, you mentioned what it would have looked like 20 years ago. We're very curious to hear how you're looking at it 20 years ahead. I mean, I know that, Ben, you've co-produced or executive produced Killing County alongside Colin Kaepernick. It's a documentary. Are you looking more at like the documentary space? Are you looking at additional podcasts, adding that to your family? Like, what's the plan for Meidas Touch moving forward?
So we want to be a large media network and continue to grow, but we want to grow brick by brick. And that's kind of been our whole growth strategy right now, is never do it like too quickly. I think a lot of issues with startups sometimes is they want to take all this money in right away and have this bloated staff without focusing on the basics, right? And so when we build, we always want to see, okay, how is this going to help grow? And if it doesn't help grow, then we don't need it. And so this brick by brick approach, I think, has been the right way to go about it. But I'd like to see, in about a year, we got about 1 million subscribers on YouTube when we really leaned into a YouTube focused approach. I'd like to continue to grow and expand that number, continue to grow and expand our digital reach, continue to provide new live show offerings. And one of the cool things when you go on our YouTube channel, you'll see about 7 videos a day. A lot of them are from me of the news stories of the day, and you'll often get 1 live show. Some days maybe you'll get 2 live shows. And so you don't get 10 live shows, though, that repeat the exact same thing that the live show the hour before just told you, like you get on the large media networks. So each show is directed with a very specific kind of purpose that we have. But I'd love to add to that. Maybe we do 2 live shows a day. Maybe we increase the content from about 7 or 8 videos to about 15 videos or so. And that's where I'd like to see us in the short term. In the long term, I'd like people to think of us of, okay, you've got Fox, you've got CNN, you've got MSNBC, and you've got the Meidas Touch Network, you've got MTN, and this is what they offer. And that has an audio podcast component. It has the digital component. I think that lots of people tell us already that they've cut the cord on cable and we're their main news source. Like, that's an incredible feeling when people say, we don't watch any other news. We watch you for the day, and that's it. But with that comes an awesome responsibility that we take very, very, very seriously. And I hope when you get to know us as well through these kind of roundtables, the one thing you walk away from, if it's anything, is how diligent and serious and that we take this every single day, and that we truly treat this mission and we truly feel about this mission like it is kind of life or death. And we leave everything out on the field and everything that we do. So you're never going to get, a half-assed performance or whatever. You're always going to get, even if it means, not sleeping, you're going to get someone who's giving you, at least to the best of their ability, all of the facts. And then finally, and I think as you saw it here with Dan's great questioning, like, I don't think you'll see a newscaster on a major media network ever even kind of admit a mistake or say, I could do this better, I could do that better. And I frequently will say that, but I think it's an important step to growth, that we are on a journey with you. We're on a journey with people who listen to us. There are so many things we can do better, and we need to be good listeners, and we need to improve. And building that Meidas Mighty community is something I really want to focus on as well. And look, we're gonna keep our ears to the ground on what the new technology is. We always want to evolve and innovate with wherever things are going. Like, as artificial intelligence changes major dynamics, could that be useful? Could that be harmful? But let's recognize that is going to be a disruptor. And how does that impact things? So we need to evolve with the technology, but we think we're very well positioned in February or going into March now of 2023 of where this could be.
Well, I love that you shortened Meidas Touch to MTN because it stands for mountain, and you definitely have a mountain to climb. But it seems like you're doing it the right way, and we'll be cheering for you the whole time. Thank you so much for coming on today. I could speak for Dan. I know he could speak for himself as well, but we really, really enjoyed this conversation.
I have.
Yeah. And we hope you have as well. So thank you so much.
Thank you.
We really enjoyed it. And I want to thank you guys also for having these conversations on this show. I think they are really, really important. And, we're in a really interesting time where, I'm not sure if you have a lot of podcast creators or people who are maybe interested in getting into podcasting who listen to the show. But ultimately, the levels for the first time ever are pretty even between you and people with the biggest budgets on the planet. And we kind of realized that too at the beginning of COVID, when everybody was doing their shows from Skype. We turned on CNN, everyone was doing their shows from Skype. The Daily Show was doing their show on Zoom. And so it became this interesting dynamic where you kind of realize, oh, okay, so they're using the same technology I have the access to. And so I think too often people get caught up in kind of the minutia of, I need the right microphone, I need the right studio, I need the right this, how am I going to do it? And I just recommend everybody just do it. And I just want to also, thank you for being the kind of engine fuel that fuels this and allows folks to have these necessary conversations, which really at no time in human history has this ever happened, where anybody could go turn on a microphone and just create and get their perspectives out in the world. So I want to give a huge shout out to you guys at Oxford for really making that a possibility, and to everyone who's listening to the show, whether you are a creator or an advertiser, for helping these conversations reach the next level. I mean, it is so, so, so important.
Well, you've plugged us and you've plugged future creators. So now we'd love for you to plug yourselves. Where can everyone find you? What's the best way to follow you? Share your information.
Sure. Well, you can follow us on all social media at Meidas Touch. That is MEIDASTOUCH, MEIDASTOUCH. So please follow us there. We're on just about every social media app you could think of, and even the new ones that have just cropped up. We're just about everywhere everyone is. So
follow Brett on Be Real is what he's saying.
Exactly. Jordy's the beer. You can find Jordy on OnlyFans. No, I'm just no, you can find. You could find all of us at Meidas Touch, and you can find our original handles from there. But I think you should focus on Meidas Touch, the Meidas Touch podcast. Go to the Meidas Touch YouTube channel. You'll find all of our stuff. We're not too difficult to find. Once you find one of those, you'll find everything else.
Perfect. Thank you so much. And as always, the show is dedicated to our mission of mobilizing marketers to advance truth and civility in journalism. We want you to not just know the news, but know what's in the news. If you're a marketer looking to balance your business objectives with your brand values, reach out to our agency, Oxford Road, by visiting oxfordroad.com and subscribing to our weekly newsletter, The Influencer. Thank you to our guests today, to Bianca, Kyle, Haley, and the team at Podcast One. And as always, influence responsibly.